Hey everybody, my name is Hudson Phillips. I'm the writer and producer of the film This World Alone. And we have this really cool anthology book that we put together called After the Fall. I still only have a pre-copy. At some point I'm going to get an actual copy in so that you can see the beautiful cover without this do not resell bar across the top. But I'm here today with Avery Ward. Avery is one of the authors in this book who wrote an amazing piece called A Black Rain Falls. How's it going, Avery?
It's going great. How are you doing?
Very, very good. So tell us, what is A Black Rain Falls? What's it about?
So it's about this Japanese native. Her name's Kyrie. She's about, the age of a millennial, comes back to Japan after studying in the United States, and she lives in Hiroshima. And after she arrives back home, re-experiences what seems to be like the atomic bomb from World War II. But afterwards finds out basically there's more to it than they originally thought, and it actually is more of an instance of time being sort of fractured as opposed to an actual nuclear attack. And it kind of, plays on humanity's mistakes that are made over and over and how we kind of put ourselves in these situations, I feel like most of the time. So it's kind of
Yeah.
commentary on that, I think.
Yeah,
And
I love
basically
that.
she's kind of coping with feelings of like survivor's guilt and not knowing how to process through it and stuff like that.
I love that theme in it of kind of the sins of the past kind of still haunting us, right?
Mhm.
That so often we have these devastating events that we kind of move on over a short period of time and don't really learn the lessons from. Is that something that was in your brain while you were writing, and was that kind of the seed of this story, or did that come as you were writing?
It kind of came as I was writing. Like what kind of inspired it was when I was younger, I was always kind of into like ghost hunting and watching shows like that. And as a kid, I used to always wonder, why are certain areas more like haunted than others? Why are certain areas more affected? And I used to always think, what if something can happen that's so traumatic to an area that it can like scar time? Is what I used to always think about. So I kind of just played on that. But then after a while, started thinking about how time does repeat itself a lot. And I feel like that's like our curse. Like you look through history and we repeat our actions over and over and over. And I feel like we only get some sort of peace when we think we've remedied something, whether it's like solving a famine or executing a serial killer. Like we feel like we've done our part. And then it's like, what if something happened where all that kind of comes back? Like, where do we have our identity in that? If all of our wrongs came back, like, do we have any sort of like idea of right? You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a powerful story and it's really gripping. I'm curious because you mentioned in your bio both that you come from a kind of diverse background, and
Mhm.
then your kind of obsession with Japanese culture. Can you talk about a little bit about just your upbringing and how all these cultures come together to make you who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually not Japanese or anything like that. That's just something I've gotten into recently, studying the language, and I'm actually planning on studying it more formally at a university probably next year.
Cool.
But I am multiracial. I'm technically mulatto, half black, half white, but a bit of everything. I'm like from almost every single country in Africa and most of Europe in my
Wow.
family line. So growing up, I experienced a lot of both sides, if that makes sense. So
Mhm.
because of that, I do have experiences about opinions on both sides. So I kind of understand talking and speaking in different voices because I feel like I'm composed of a lot of different voices, if that makes sense.
Wow.
So like
Yeah.
I didn't grow up just white and I didn't grow up black. Like I always said, oh, I'm mixed. And that really influenced my friendships, the way I saw myself. And I feel like it gave me a really kind of well-rounded view of the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, and your ability to kind of embody different cultures, like in this story, really, I feel like is unique. What advice would you give to somebody who is, because there is a bit of a stigma now of, for me, I'm a white guy. Should I only write white guy characters, right? And I
Right.
don't want to, because I want to provide a depth and a breadth of storytelling, and I want to write what's interesting to me. And I want to write characters that are interesting to me and characters that I want to learn about.
Hmm.
But there is a bit of a stigma of like, oh,
Right.
I wrote a screenplay recently with a Black female lead, and it's like, do I have the right to do that? Do you have some thoughts on the stigma around that, and then also what tips you might have for getting into the shoes of someone from a different culture?
I actually do have a lot of thoughts on that. I actually did a documentary with a friend who's a Black African American male, well, African American
Okay.
male, and he loves horror movies. And we talked about the stigma of Black people and their roles in horror and their roles in media and things like that. And he and I hold a similar point of view on it, where we don't feel there's anything wrong with people writing characters like that. And I think it should be done more.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it should be done more of a place of honesty and not like, oh, let's fill in this diversity role, or let's use
Right.
only the stereotypes. I know, like, if you have a Black character, doesn't mean they're necessarily from a bad part of town. They
Mm-hmm.
might be from the suburbs. So things like that, I'll take a stereotype and I'll flip it, because I feel like the stereotypes don't really exist all the time, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like more people do need to write characters from different cultures and different backgrounds, but as long as it's from a place of education and speaking to people from these backgrounds. Like, I have a lot of Japanese friends, and I was asking them questions about places and things that had happened, stuff like that. So, like, even I think my biggest tip is, like, you might have an idea of what the story is, but that should never overshadow what someone's experience is. So sometimes I might have an idea for a story, but once I study the culture more, I might realize my story might change.
Mm.
That makes sense. So I mean, Tarantino did it really well with Django. A lot of people criticized him for that, but he was actually welcomed a lot by the Black community for taking that stance and portraying slavery in a very accurate way,
Mm.
because he just was like, whether you can accept it or not, this is what happened. And I really admired that.
Yeah. No, I think that's awesome advice, and I think it really is about being curious, and making sure you're doing your research and making sure you're talking to people from those cultures, and that you're not
Mhm.
just assuming that because chances are you are inaccurate in what you assume. So I
Mhm.
think that's great.
A lot of research.
Yeah. So I would love for you to do a bit of a reading from Black Rain Falls, if you're ready to do that.
Yeah, sure thing. Before I go into that, I did want to
Yeah.
mention that there are two Japanese words that I have in this excerpt, so I thought I would define them real quick beforehand.
Okay, cool.
Can you still see me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So firstly, there's a mention of what are called hibakusha, and it's basically people who were affected by the atomic bomb, so who were in the attack. Technically, it's anybody who's been affected by an atomic bomb, but it's mostly used for people who were in the Hiroshima or Nagasaki bombings. So I mentioned them, and also I mentioned what are called yukata. It's kind of like a Japanese garment, kind of like a kimono, but thinner and a little bit more casual.
Mm.
So those are the only two terms I mentioned. I thought I would define those first for you.
Awesome.
Okay, so here we go. My eyes drifted to the river once more. Among the bodies were a few men, women, and children that flickered and faded before my very eyes. I could have bet my life on it, but I knew it to be shock or the likelihood that they were forced underwater by the others. I now know that I was dead wrong. A woman gave a blood-curdling scream. Look, look, she shouted, pointing across the river. We followed her hand to see another horde of hibakusha walking along the edge. From this distance, the men were indistinguishable from the women, save for a few scraps hanging from their bodies in the vague shapes of button-ups and yukata. I think I might have even spotted a high school girl in what was left of her uniform. Do you see? The woman asked us again. I nodded, finally understanding. The victims before us began to flicker and fade, as if nothing more than sunlight passing through the leaves of a tree. I frowned, rubbed the dust from my eyes, and looked again, but this was no passing illusion. I noticed how dated their clothing was, as if from a time gone by, and I remembered the man who'd saved me. Another sob burst forth from me, and I covered my mouth with both hands. I understood then, as quickly as lightning could strike, the severity of the situation. This was more than a nuclear attack, more than the destruction of a town. History was occurring for a second time, and we were the chosen witnesses of it. Before us were the original victims, begging for water, death, or salvation. Like a dying candle, they flickered out completely, only to reappear once more, solid as you or me, and continue on. It's not possible, I whispered. What we witnessed that day on the shore of our dying community were fragments of the past, interspersed with our own suffering. It didn't make sense. I knew it had to be nothing more than a cruel joke, an urging to not forget the past, but how could we? The woman next to me began to sob uncontrollably, and others shouted in fear as I watched silently as the bodies waxed and waned in the waters below. I only snapped out of it when I felt something cold hit my arm. I looked down to see a black drop of liquid on my skin, dark and thick as oil. Black rain, full of dust and radiation, the remnants of a city. The drops began to fall faster now. I draped my scrub top over my head and spotted a large piece of plywood on the ground. I jogged over to it and with the help of a few others, lifted it up. Others scattered for makeshift cover as well. I sat under it with 3 men and 2 other women as we watched history rain upon us. A bittersweet pang gripped my heart when I realized that somewhere in there, my parents were too.
Mm. Man, I love this story so much.
Thank you.
It's such a cool and powerful, just the way that you reveal the bits and pieces as it goes.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and really connect to your lead character. So where can people find out more about you and kind of follow along with your writing journey?
As of right now, I'm still working on my portfolio, but I do have a Twitter account that I'm on pretty frequently. It's NERU_CHAN45. And I'm on there pretty frequently. And my writing journey, I feel like, is just beginning. I have a couple of things here and there that I've completed, but haven't quite gotten done yet. If that makes sense.
Totally. And hopefully we can work on some more things together, which I know I'd really love. Everybody can buy the book now after the fall on Amazon. You can find out more information at mirrorboxfilms.com. Avery, thank you so much. This was awesome. Love talking with you. I
appreciate it.
Let's do it again soon.
Yeah, I'd like to. Good luck with everything today.
Appreciate it.
See ya. Bye-bye.